Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Chris Bircher, Director of Technical Services here at CTC, and today we are going to go over our BIM Data Suite and all of the little nuts and bolts that go into it and how it works and all the good stuff. So it's going to be a good data-rich webinar today. Before I get going, though, I want to remind everyone, please ask questions throughout the webinar. I've got my eye on it, so I'll be answering them as I see them, if it makes sense. Otherwise, I will take time at the end to answer everything else that's hanging out there. This is also being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel shortly after the presentation is complete, sometime later this week, I hope. With that, let's just jump right into it. So, one of the things that everybody's asking for these days is data. I want data about my BIM models. I want data about Revit. I want data for this, data for that, data for the other thing. And we at CTC are making a big effort to give you guys access to that data. We've got a number of different offerings for that. One of them is our BIM Data Suite, which is kind of the creme de la creme of data extraction that we have offered for our Revit users. And there's a number of different ways to access data depending on what you're looking for. So today we're going to show you how to do that, and then some data viewing options depending on what you are looking to review your data in. So there's some flexibility built in there based on what you want to do. So today, what I'm going to do is show you guys kind of where everything is and how to get your hands on this data. And there's a couple of different ways to go about doing it, and show you some examples of the data that we've retrieved in the Power BI reporting that we are providing along with it. A little bit about the setup and how to get things going on your end, and then where everything is, where to get your hands on it, and all that good stuff. So this is a very tricky one to do by PowerPoint. So I'm not going to do a PowerPoint. This is the end. What I'm going to first do, though, is start off by showing you guys how we can start gathering data right out of the gate. Oh, that's not the window I wanted. This is the window I wanted. Okay, so I mentioned to you there's a couple of different ways to get your hands on the data, right? So there are two functions that come along with BIM Data Suite. There's a couple of different modules built in. The first one that we're going to discuss is our Project Activity Logger, or PAL. Project Activity Logger is installed on all Revit users' machines and will extract some data from the Revit projects upon open and really upon a sync to central. So the reason why I have this folder open over here is so that you can start watching some of this data get extracted. Now, on a user's perspective, they're not going to know anything's happening, right? So there's no interaction from anyone at this point other than the normal day-to-day workflow of opening and closing and working in Revit and saving. So as you can see, that the files are already starting to populate themselves, and I'm getting a list of these weird named files. They're all JSON files, and this is the recording of the file being opened. So now I know how long it took to open this file, who opened the file, when it happened, and some basic data about the project, and it's all going away now. So all of that data just got logged to my SQL database. And we'll get into this a little bit more on some of the setup part, but that's all gone. And from a user's perspective, they didn't have to do anything. It just happened. The service opens automatically when Revit opens and kind of takes care of itself. So now if I were to say, switch my floor plan and then, add another wall to this just for the sake of adding something here. Just going to draw this little bit outside and then sync to central. it's going to record data again. And this will work with any work shared project stored on your network like normal, or on BIM 360, or on Revit server if you're still using that for whatever reason. So all of that information, regardless of wherever you're storing your files, that's all going to get recorded and put it up to your SQL database to be viewed in whatever you want to view it in. All right, and this will disappear. And that's really the gist of it, right? That's for the project activity logger portion, or for the PAL portion, that's all, right? Well, now that I've got all this data, how do I look at it? Where does it go? So it goes to a SQL Server database, whether that's on premises and physically behind your firewall in your server room, or a lot of people are making the change to using Azure services and Azure SQL database. You can push it there too. Our tools can write to that location. We have a database that can be put up there, and then you can view it in a program like Power BI. We have set up a starting point, or a template, if you will, that you can work with to start to view some of this information. So for example, this is our project activity example, our PAL BI file. And so for the data that we're actually pulling, there's quite a bit here, even though we didn't have to do anything really. So things like file size. I now know what the largest files are. I know if we've done some project setup and defined things, I know approaching deadlines, or if I've just blown those deadlines out of the water, which we have, because we haven't updated that. But what projects are getting the most time spent on them? Who's working on those projects the most? How long things are taking to sync to central, or how long it takes to open, right? And that's just right there on the first tab. So I'm already getting a lot of pretty good information about my Revit files in my office, and I just opened it. But then we can kind of keep moving on down. So we can set up projects, give them project numbers that match, the project numbering system that we're using in our office. And I can start to dig in and find out more information about certain files, like, there we go. I can start to figure out stuff about the model and the project. So depending on the files that you're working with, or the projects and how you set them up and how many Revit files are associated with that project, you can pick the number and pick the file and start looking at, various things like how many work sets, are we dealing with phases, and how many phases are we using, design options, materials defined, views defined, are we using, how many, unplaced families do we have loaded into our project, how many in-place families, rooms and spaces, and how many of those are redundant or, in the schedule but not in the model, that sort of thing. A breakdown of the views by category and links, and if there's any warnings, what warnings are we dealing with here? And that's just the summary of the files themselves. We can even get down further and start looking at model performance, and to get a variation of the syncs to central times. And let me just adjust my date sliders here, because apparently they decided to click a weird time. But now I can start to look at these projects in these files and get an idea of when things were taking a while to open, or why, when the file size jumped a bunch, what happened here, who did that? Well, apparently that was from one of my saves. I must have added something and then turned around and removed it right away. Same thing with warnings. Why did I get a jump in my warning counts? Probably the same little thing that I did here for whatever reason. But you can start to hover over these data points here and figure out what that metric is at a particular time and what user is, in a sense, responsible for doing that. Whether that is a good thing, or or whether that's to use it as a teaching experience to tell them that they maybe did something wrong, or to figure out maybe there's something wrong on their machine that's causing us a sync to central or a file open to take as long as it is. Our save times haven't changed, so that's great. But then you can keep going. We have all kinds of information in here. Now, I'm just going to take a step back to see all the different sync to centrals for this particular file. And we've got it kind of placed in a handful of projects here, which is why I wanted to kind of have no filter on this. But you get the idea here. So here we got a whole bunch of sync to centrals that were very quick, but then we've got a couple that took a while. And we can start to we can select those and figure out maybe why it would take so long. There's information about the computer that's being used. I know this is my secondary laptop that I have, and it's supremely underpowered compared to the one I use normally. And it's all wireless. So that might be why that one took as long as it did versus every other sync to central that we have here, because it was probably not running on a Wi-Fi connection. But you have the opportunity to, click on each one of these little bullets here and get some information about the model itself as well, and see what's changed throughout time. And maybe you'll notice that the warning counts of certain projects goes up, and then the sync to central time takes longer. Or, you can start to maybe deduce what's wrong or what's going wrong on your machine with projects just by looking at some of these metrics here. And if you see warning counts are a little high for a particular file, you can jump to the warnings tab and try to figure out more about that file and why we have warnings. And it'll tell you how many different unique warnings there are and how many objects are, affected by this. And then it'll tell you the warning message itself, where to find it, and what the element is, honestly. So whether it's with a wall and a room separation line, or objects overlapping themselves, or elements are joined but not intersecting, all the typical Revit warnings that you get, they're all listed here. We get the element IDs for those. So I have the ability, oops, I didn't mean to drag that. I have the ability to select those, or to grab that element ID, like we all know, search for it in my Revit project, fix the problem. Next time I sync to central, I'm going to get an updated report, basically, when I refresh my database, and now I'll know. It should say I have 47 if I only fixed one warning. So this stays up to date as much as you want. The only thing you got to do is hit refresh, and you'll get your updates. And so there's, I could go on down the line and talk about each and every single tab. But effectively, you can figure out what project, what file within said project, and in some cases, which user or users. Figure out what views people are spending a lot of their time in. The exit view here is what's getting a lot of face time for both myself and if I were to grab the right Revit file, Sean as well. And that's oftentimes the view we have open when we do a lot of our demos and presentations and such, which is why we've spent 128 minutes looking at our exit view in this case. So there's some, you start to see where people are focusing a lot of their efforts at different stages of the project, which is kind of cool. You get to, get a feel for, are people actually working, or do they just open the file and let it sit there, like apparently Sean and I love to do. So you can, it's pretty interesting the amount of information you can start to extract out of this just by looking at the data reports that you get. But yeah, so things that you get out of this, you get a lot of basic user information. You get some basic Revit project and model info. We could start to get into what versions of Revit are being used by certain users and by certain machines. Making sure that everybody's either up to date with the latest versions of Revit that we've deployed in our office, or making sure that everyone's got the update applied, because sometimes when you try to deploy an update like that, something gets missed for whatever reason. There's always at least one person that didn't get that update. This is a good way to find out who that is now, or at least what machine that is. Go track it down. Get them their updates. What add-ins are installed, and this tracks all add-ins, every add-in. So it's not just CTC add-ins. This will tell you everything. So whether it's Bluebeam, obviously our CTC stuff shows up, Dynamo, all the Autodesk add-ins, the Keynote, something or other in here. This guy I have PyRevit installed, so it's not filtering everything out or anything out. Versions of Revit being used by project. So for this particular project, we've got 3 different versions of Revit being used at the same time, apparently. According to this report, we've opened this file, this project in 3 versions of Revit, which, we like to mix it up a little bit, I guess. So, so you can see it's a good way to keep track of things. And then there's additional, overviews in a number of projects, how many users are in there, who's using it the most, and additional performance tabs based on date, project, model. So with the project activity logging, there's a lot of good data here. And these, again, do come with the Data Suite installs. And those are, depending on what version of the Data Suite you have, if you're up to date on the latest version, those are being installed currently to the C drive, to C users public CTC software. And then there should be a folder in there called Project Activity Logger, where you'll have a couple of Power BI files. Actually, I'll just jump this over. So you can see we're providing 2 different Power BI files for you to review with. One is a kind of a direct connect to what's behind your firewall locally in your office. The other one makes it for an easier connection to work with any sort of web-hosted database like Azure. However, the Web API one will work regardless. So, and actually they'll both do what you need it to. So it really just depends on what you want to use. They're both the exact same template, have the exact same set of tabs across here down the bottom. So I just wanted to point that out. So part 2 to the BIM Data Suite is the Project Snapshot Exporter. Now this is the part that is actually in Revit, where that requires us to get to, well, it enables us to get to another level of the data. So with the Project Activity Logger, we were kind of getting a lot of, really kind of basic information about our Revit files for a health check, right? File size, how long it takes to open, how long it takes to save, and some of the elements that go into our projects that tend to increase the file size quite a bit. There's stuff about families, placed and unplaced, views used, on sheets or not on sheets, rooms and spaces that aren't being used, number of views, counts, things like that. And then there's more about versioning and users and hours and stuff like that. But it's not everything, right? So the Project Snapshot Exporter gives you access to everything, because we're actually taking a snapshot of the project, of the Revit file itself at this moment in time, based on a set of series of filters and some criteria that we get to define. So from the CTC Management tab, you will have our BIM Data Suite toolbar over here, and we only have the one icon for Project Snapshot Exporter. When you open that up, you get presented with a window like this. And all this window and this utility does is it takes the filters that you've established, extracts that from the Revit file, and either sends it right to your SQL Server database, or you can save this information to an XML file or JSON file to be used however you want in whatever database format that you would like to use. You will have to rebuild all those tables and establish the relationships and whatnot, but you can change it and do something else with it as you see fit. We also have a model compare option, which then allows you to either write it to the SQL database at a later date if you'd like, or create a handful of these and use our model compare tool from the BIM project suite to compare data another way. So yeah, so what I'm going to do, all my file paths got messed up, so I'm going to repass these real quick to the ones that I had set up here previously, just to show you that it does work. So it'll update in a second. There we go. And then this one's my JSON, so I'll put that there, and then I've got my model compare file, which I will put in the model compare folder. And now I am doing all three of these. You don't have to do all, or actually I'm doing all four. You don't have to do all four. Just do what you're working with. The only reason why I have all these checked is to highlight that they can all be done. You may only care about writing your data to your SQL Server. So as long as this box is checked and your server name's here, you're done. You don't have to worry about it. If you're not using SQL and you want to get the raw data to an XML or to a JSON file, go right ahead. You don't have to, but you don't have to do all of it if you're not going to use it all. For those using SQL databases, I do recommend exporting a model compare file at the same time when you take your snapshots. And the reason for that is if there's an interruption when writing to the SQL database for whatever reason, the data is not lost. You don't have to sit here and take the snapshot again and attempt to write it to the database. If you get your model compare file exported, you can always turn around and just write your model compare file to the database instead of taking a whole nother snapshot again. So I just wanted to point that out because there are options here. So on the surface right now, if I just hit begin, it's just going to take a snapshot with whatever filters I've got set up. Now you have the ability to control what filters are being used here. So if you click this filters button, it's going to open up another window that allows you to pick and choose what categories, what data types, what parameters, and then from the model, and then where in the model, what level are we pulling from, what design option, what phase potentially. And that's a lot of data. And this goes all the way down to parameter values. So it's getting everything if we don't touch it. But that's a lot of data that in a lot of cases that we're not even using. Like I don't have any analytical members in here, or I don't have any mechanical equipment in here. You may, or I don't care to analyze my mechanical data because that's not what I worry about. Just me personally. You may not want anything to do with doors, so that's fine. Don't extract doors. You can customize this. You can uncheck a box to include all and then hit the edit button, pick and choose what categories you want. Same thing with data types and parameters, and then from where to search what level or what phase or specific views to look in. So you've got some flexibility here to control what you want to do. We've also provided, there's also a couple of snapshot filters that come along for the ride that you can use as a starting point to kind of get your feet wet, get some basic information about the projects that you're working with in the optimal health check snapshot, which is just pulling some key data points out that we care about, that we thought you guys would like to have your hands on for like a health check. And then we also have our full snapshot that allows you to just get your hands on everything. So I like doing the health check. That's kind of my go-to. So I always like loading that up, making sure it's here. So I'm going to get good data, but not all the data. And again, those come along for the ride. You have access to those as well, so you don't have to worry about creating your own health check. You can modify it. You can. I do recommend creating your own filters and saving those out. But at this point, I can click begin. But before I do that, I also want to point out that these can be scheduled to run on a regular basis. So you can take and build a scheduled configuration that runs with certain filters at a certain time, taking and creating or writing to the database or doing your XML/JSON/model compare file, what type of project info that you want your hands on. And then in addition to the filters that you're working with, you can create a configuration, which then allows you to basically create a scheduled task to run, every Tuesday night or on all your projects, or some projects get these settings, some projects get these other settings. Like, you have that flexibility to kind of set it up and do it however you want. And then you can create your own scheduled task. Similar to, I don't know if any of you are familiar with our plotter exporter. You can create a scheduled task with that to do your batch processing. You can do this here to create your snapshots. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear and you guys were aware of that, in case you wanted to get some good data on some of your projects on a regular basis. So you can click begin, and it's going to go ahead and start working its way through the file and taking the snapshot. So I'm going to do that, but then instead of sitting here and staring at this to finish, it should only take a few minutes. I am going to open the Power BI file for this, which should be this file here. Yes, it is. All right. So now what we've got here is the project snapshot Power BI file. So this is the second BI file that comes along for the ride in part of the installation pack that you'll get your hands on, where you can link this up and start viewing the snapshots that you're taking on your projects. So this will list all of the projects that you're working with. I've got mine pointed to a local database on my C drive, so right now I've only got the one project with a couple snapshots. And you can start to look at some of the basic information that I've captured in this case. Project parameters, warnings, component families, family types, system families, text, dimensions, line styles and patterns, views and view templates, view filters, and it tells you how many are found, what's not being used, and then it's trying to give us a bit of a score here, letting you know, are we doing good or are we not doing so good, right? And then there's another row down here for, total instances placed of families or system families, or, text and dimensions and stuff. And then, and that's just kind of your base overview. So if you've taken a snapshot of a particular project multiple times, you can start to look at the different snapshots and seeing what's here and how things have changed. So in September of this year, I had 278 component families in here. And today, this morning, I had 264. So somewhere along the lines, I purged out 14 families from my project. I had 64 warnings previously. Today, I've got 70. So there's something going on here. I did something's happened in my file that I've done. And you can start to review some of these changes. And that's kind of the beauty of taking snapshots of the same file. Now we can start to compare and review how things are changing and progressing throughout the duration of the project. That snapshot took 318 seconds before. This time it took 293. So it's kind of interesting to review some of this data. And it's kind of cool to watch it progress. So then, on that tab, we had our project parameters field. I'm not a big fan of project parameters. I would rather have it be a shared parameter in the family. Obviously, system families require shared parameters being added to a project as a project parameter. But what I like about this report here is it can tell me what's shared or not. So if I want to know what's not a shared parameter, I can click false and it will auto filter this list. It gives me a report on all of the project parameters that are not shared. So things like area per person and ceiling height and the fire rating parameters that have been added. And the Omni class for every single family category. But you can start to run through this list and kind of get an idea of the project parameters that are here, what categories they're associated with, and is it a shared, is it instance versus type? Is it visible or is it a hidden parameter? What category it's associated with? And right, this is just this massive list. I can also then say, well, is it, let's just say I want to look at my door parameters. So I can scroll down in this list, click on doors, and now it's only going to show me parameters that are found associated with doors. And it gives me the parameter list, and I can, start to get an idea of what's actually assigned to my doors. And then is it shared or not, right? And I can click false again. And now I've got my list of project parameters assigned to doors that are not shared, which will make it difficult potentially for scheduling or for tagging, mainly really for tagging at this point. But maybe I've got another fire rating parameter that is shared and added to the family that's different than the one that was added to the project. And now maybe there's issues I'm going to run into here with scheduling. So it just kind of gives you an opportunity to dig it in a little bit more. And maybe you can find stuff that's not set up the way you would normally like to have it set up. In addition to the parameters, we have our work sets. I can see how many work sets are here, what the list is, and what's on that work set. So if I wanted to start to look at each work set individually, I can click on exterior, and these are all the elements on the exterior work set. I don't know if zones need to be on the exterior work set, or I'm pretty sure my model group shouldn't be on that work set either. But you can start to take a look at some of this information and get an idea of what's going on here, which is pretty slick. I kind of like this feature. It doesn't tell me which specific instances of items are here, but it gets me going down the right direction. Especially if you have a much more explicit work set list. Like we've got ours, it's pretty broad: exterior, interior, FF&E, links, right? The larger the project, the more breakdown you have in your work sets to provide you more control over visibility and whatnot. It's very possible that you'll have a much longer list here. My computer dinged at me. I bet you yep, snapshot's done. So now this is done. It's going to finish writing in the background to the SQL Server. If I leave this open, I'll get a log report at the end. So I'm going to leave it open just so we can see that log a little later. Yeah. So as we kind of keep going, a lot of this stuff is interactive. So even though I have one of these options picked here, the list will start to filter each other down to give me a better report. When it comes to any, so it doesn't matter what snapshot you've got selected here either. It's going to start giving you different information based off what it found at that snapshot. So while I don't know why my links is taking a while to load, but since it is, I'm going to look at this question that came in. If we want to extract the casework, specialty items, and generic families that are actually used in a project, not just loaded into a project, do I need BIM Data Suite, or can I get that information from Hive? That, my friend, is a great question. And to get the casework that is placed in your model, or any family for that matter that is placed in your model, with information about those instances, you would need a tool like BIM Data Suite. Hive, and Hive has its own project activity logger as well. And it's the same project activity logger that we talked about today with BIM Data Suite. We can get basic information about how many families are in the project. And in some cases, we can break it out by category. Hive gives us a little bit more because it's got a different API system that we're working with over there. But if you wanted to know which casework is in a project, what level it's on, what parameters were defined for certain things, what room it's in, all of that comes from Data Suite. You wouldn't be able to get that out of Hive. So again, it ultimately depends on how much data you're looking to retrieve. If you just need to know what families have been loaded into what project, the Hive Pal can probably get that for you. Anything beyond that, though, you'll want something like Data Suite and snapshots. Here we go. So that loaded up. I don't know why that took so long, but so now it tells me how many links and imports I have. The imports specifically, if I click on that, it's going to update my list here and tell me that I've imported in some CAD drawings, and in some cases to the model itself, it shows me what work set it's on. But there is the one outlier here that is actually imported to a view only, and I personally don't care for that at all. So that's something that I'll have to go fix now in this file and get rid of that, because I personally don't like it. And to be honest, since I do have this set this way now, I'm going to check the snapshot I took this morning and find out why. Oh, see, my other one's already here, the one from today. Look at that. And it's still there. So that's great. I have imported CAD files into views. I'll get to go back and fix that later. Yay me. But you get the idea. So we can start to see now, and we can find problems. And either you can go back and address them yourselves, or now we can tell someone else that's more familiar with that project, hey, you've got a bunch of imports in the views. I don't like that. Turn them into links, or at least import that to the model and put it on a work set. Similar to how we had warnings with the PAL data, we get warnings here as well. And I can start to get into a little bit more about these warnings. And again, I can compare them. We did have a difference in the warnings here, but I can start to look at and see what are these warnings here, right? Oh, let me just back this out. I clicked on too many things here. I've got corner mullion has been placed at the end of a curtain wall and is not joined, right? So I can click on that. We got a few of them. The nice thing about this is that it's a nice little filter and allows you to kind of get hyper-focused on that particular warning type and the elements within that warning. That's where, I'm a big fan of this, reviewing the data here versus anywhere else, really, especially in Revit. Like, yeah, you can do it in Revit and you can actually get by, or, kick out your HTML file and just knock them off the list as you go. This, to me, is just a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more interactive. And I just like it better. That's just me. And it looks nice. So, but everything that you need is here. Continuing on, you get your component families, and this gives you a list of everything in the file. Total load of families, types, instances, and family types. Gives you a full, complete breakdown of number of families by category, the complete family list, and instance and counts. So I can grab my furniture and get a complete list of all the furniture that's been loaded in my project, how many types each family has, and then how many times they've been used in the file. And if I want, I can click on that and see the exact type name here as well. So started with the master list, worked my way down, and now I know I've got 17 of these chairs. I think that's what I've picked. Yeah, those are chairs. So, but that's the idea here. You have the ability to kind of dial all the way down to the individual element and how many instances placed in this case. Whether it's you know, with starting with detail items and working your way through. And actually, look at that. I've got 609. I've got this entire family and all its types loaded in, but I haven't used a single one of them. And that's true with a lot of these details. So I've got a lot of fluff in this file. I could probably get the file size down quite a bit if I just purged once. But that's one great thing about this. And now I know I've got visual proof that you've got too much stuff loaded into your file. If you're not going to use it, get rid of it. You're certainly not going to use 609 angle shapes. So, and that's the idea, right? So that's what this is getting you. And you have access to the database. So we've given you a Power BI file with access to all of this information from a snapshot. You have the ability to take a snapshot of just about anything in the file, and it'll record it to your database. And then if you know anything about Power BI whatsoever, you can take this template that we've provided and take another step forward and create additional reports and graphs that gives you data that's meaningful to you and your process and your workflow. Maybe you need to know what the parameter values of certain doors are, or the parameter values within rooms. You can build that out by setting up the project filters, the snapshot filters, taking the snapshot of your Revit files, and then building the tables here in Power BI to look at all that information. That's all 100% doable, and you can do that. And I'm just kind of clicking on through the line here as I talk to show you some of the different outputs here that you get and some of the reports that we've provided. This dimension segment one is really cool. We've effectively built dimension checker into our Power BI file here. So at least on a reporting standpoint. So now I know where dimension overrides have happened. And you can see it's supposed to be 10'7" and 7/8, but it's reading as 10'6". So somewhere along the line, somebody modified that. And you can see some are replaced with dots or the period and probably text put over the top of it, right? That was a very common workflow years ago before people figured out how to replace with actual dimension values. So, but you get the idea. We have ways of figuring this out now. So this is a great tool for digging in and getting to the bottom of everything. All right, now there's one final piece to this that I haven't talked about yet, and that's the BIM Data Admin. Now, I had it open. You probably saw it for a quick second. Let me go get it. Here we are. So now BIM Data Admin is a little utility that allows us to organize this data a little bit. You can see I've got my Revit model, but you can build out the project here. And within the project, you can tell it where the files are located. If you need, if you wanted to keep track of the architectural model and the structural model, because it's all part of the same, your multidisciplinary firm, all part of your same project, you can certainly do so by adding both files to the project. We have snapshot and project activity data that comes along here that can all be ported to this particular project so that it can be reviewed accordingly. And that the whole point of this right here is it's for organizations or organizational purposes, right? Especially with the, not so much here in the snapshot, but absolutely in the project activity logger piece. Project, there's so much data coming along at every sync to central, right? If you think about it, you got 10 people on a project, each person's syncing maybe 5 times a day. That's 50 syncs a day. That's a lot of data coming in every day. We just to look at all that in project 0 or in my undefined project, that's a lot of data that I have to look at all the time and to try to parse through and navigate through. So being able to break it down into individual projects to look at some of this data is going to help you out immensely. So that's what we have and why we have BIM Data Admin, so that you can organize your projects a little bit better and get you the opportunity to put some sense behind some of the data that you're looking at. Not just looking at the Revit file name, which is presented in many other locations throughout this. But if the project information itself is useful, then organizing it with BIM Data Admin can help you with that. And it's just as simple as clicking the Add button. We only require 2 fields, and that's the project, the office, and project number. Really is all we care about. We don't fill out the rest of the data as you see fit. I'm all for it, but that's not necessary, right? Set up the project number. Well, I'm not going to do that. Who am I kidding? 2023, what's 10/17? Maybe, yeah. Right, you put the rest of the information in there if you need to. But now we get the project. And now I can start associating data, whether it's by adding the file path physically, or if the Revit files have already been opened, we have the ability to link it all together. So by going to our project activity editor or snapshot editor tabs, I can look for data that has not been mapped to a project. And the data that's not mapped to a project tells me where it came from. So now I've got data for 4 different files that need to be associated with a project. It's gonna, if you work with BIM 360 files or your ACC models, that data will show up here as well. So I can take all of my data, project activity logged data, and move it to the appropriate project. And I can just grab those paths and hit map folder to an existing project, and then you pick the number that you want to associate it with. This is the one I just made. That's the one I'm going to map, and it's going to take all the data and move it to it. All right, so that's taking the file path. Then there's also this session records not mapped. So again, it's possible that data is being recorded already and you haven't gotten around to setting the projects up yet. So if that's the case, you can pull that data into the project once it's been established. Let's see. Project file records not mapped. So I got all my data is mapped, so this is good. I've got a couple of other folders here, but these are that's not mine, so I'm not going to map that one. But I'll map this one. This one's supposed to go to the office building project here. So we'll hit yes. Yeah, we'll do that. That's fine. So that's the idea. And then there's a couple of additional settings. Like there's some database maintenance if you want to delete some of the records because they're old and obsolete and they're not needed anymore. Helps you kind of keep things nice and clean and current. We also have some logging settings here for what type of information are we looking for. And this is really, kind of high level. Do I care about the loaded add-ins, or when audits were used, or when people are printing and information about the print jobs? What kind of warning information do I want? So you do have the ability to not gather some of this data if you don't want to. And again, it's not a ton of data, but some of it definitely is worth it. So you got some options here for that. Alrighty, now I will say that coming up in a few weeks, we're going to do another webinar that discusses how this is all set up from start to finish. We're going to do a BIM Data Suite installation and configuration webinar. And so be on the lookout for that coming up here in a few weeks. And that is about it. So what I want to do now, last but not least here, is jump back here and look at the log. So after the snapshot is complete, and after the data from the snapshot has been logged to the SQL Server, or you'll get a report that looks like this. So it's going to tell you exactly what's being done and if it was successful or not. So here it's loaded my settings. It's now writing all of this data to SQL, and you can see it's writing this table, this table, this table, and you can start to review this and get an idea of how much data is actually being recorded. The big table is always element parameter value. I just captured 135,000 rows of data during our presentation today. So there's a lot that happened, a lot being recorded. All of that is going to be visible in one of my databases that can be reviewed in a Power BI file. So, yeah, that takes care of us for today. If you're interested in learning more about BIM Data Suite, you can certainly come to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/CTC Software. We do have a number of different playlists here, including a playlist for BIM Data Suite, which will give you more information about the project activity logger, project snapshot exporter, and then in the future, more about the setup and configuration of the data suite as a whole. And if you want to get your hands on it and try a couple of things out and take a look at it a little bit closer, go to our website, ctcsoftware.com, scroll down to BIM Data Suite, review a little bit more on our product page, and reach out with any other questions. Or if you want to give it a whirl, give us a holler, and we'll help you get something set up. Alrighty. That takes care of me for today. I want to say thank you all for joining. I appreciate you guys. And look forward to seeing you next week at the same bat time, same bat channel, where we discuss another one of our products. Thank you all.